Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Marshall, co-founder and executive director of This Is My Brave, and welcome to episode 15, season 1 of BraveTV. We'd first like to thank the Alkermes Inspiration Grant COVID-19 Relief Fund for sponsoring this season, as we continue to explore how COVID-19 and current affairs are impacting our mental health. Today's episode is dedicated to the feelings of grief and loss that we're all experiencing during this incredibly difficult year. After 8 months of quarantine and social isolation, we want to acknowledge that we're all grieving many losses this year, and it's okay to feel our feelings and talk about it. I wanted to invite one of our alumni storytellers as my guest today, as she's been around the block, so to speak, when it comes to grief and loss. And she has a unique perspective to share on how we can utilize meditation and introspection to help address the pain of loss. Casey Marr's father passed away from a drunk driving accident in 2010. Her mother passed away from cancer in 2016, and soon after, her brother passed away from an accidental overdose in 2017. Casey shared her story in our 2018 Spring Boston show, and then went on to co-produce 2 more This Is My Brave shows, Boston 2018 and Houston 2019, as well as she leads our Yoga Flow series this year. So let's jump right in and get started. So welcome, Casey. I'm so glad you're here to do this episode with me. This year has been unbelievable in so many aspects, and one way is we're all grieving different losses. So I wanted to start by, can you give everyone kind of your backstory with going through grief?
Yes, thanks for having me, Jen. I think this is going to be a great tool for a lot of people to be able to check back in with throughout the holiday season. The holiday season is usually a challenging time anyway for people who have experienced grief on any level, but this year we're really going to be experiencing it collectively as a society. But to touch on a little bit of my story, my father passed away in May of 2010. From a drunk driving accident. And that was the first time for me to really experience what I like to call, it's just like profound grief, because this is like your immediate bloodline circle, whoever that might be. And it was, excuse me, it was extremely devastating. But I have to say that it wasn't as, I guess, traumatizing as whenever my mom passed away. My mom passed away in May of, I get all the dates wrong all the time, Jen. May of 2016. And then my brother passed away the following May of 2017. So the irony is it all happens in May. But the back-to-back grief of my mother and my brother brought up so much. Not only was I experiencing grief, which I wouldn't say expert, but I became very knowledgeable about grief with all the work that I have done in grief. But then it opened up a portal to the trauma I had kind of buried for many years. So it was compounded between the 2 griefs. Now, ever since then, I have solely I research yoga, I research emotions, and I research how we can move better with them. But the profound door that opened this up was grief.
Yeah, we were talking before we jumped into record about the effects of grief on top of grief. Can you touch on that a little bit, and about what people who are tuning in might be dealing with right now, and kind of just give some explanation on that?
Mm-hmm. So one of the first things that I ever found out about grief was that when you are grieving, and it can be anything, a lot of people associate grief with death, but it's not necessarily just an actual death of a human. It could be a divorce, it could be a friendship, it could be a job, it could be anything. There are so many things that we are, right now, a lot of our society is grieving not being able to be with people. But to use an example of it, for instance, is when my mom passed away, I was experiencing the grief with not seeing her in the very beginning. And then a few weeks into it, I started feeling this like tremendous amount of guilt. But I had known I had done as much as I could possibly do for my mother. She passed away from cancer. But then what I realized is what was underneath that was a lot of unresolved guilt that I was experiencing because of my dad. So that could happen. Right now, a person could be experiencing grief because they aren't able to be with their family for the holidays. But then underlying that, it can get deeper and deeper. And you could be like, well, why all of a sudden am I thinking of my fourth grade best friend who passed away?
Mhm.
And it's because either it's a little bit of unresolved grief, or it's just grief on top of grief on top of grief on top of grief. One thing that therapists say about grief is if you do not deal with it, if you shut it off, because grief can feel extremely painful in the body. So a lot of people just cut it off. It comes back, and it usually comes back. I think a little bit probably harder.
Mhm.
And because it's like, if you hide anything, when it resurfaces, it's like always,
Yeah.
there's always a little bit more to deal with.
Mhm.
So you coined a good term when we were talking earlier. You called it, what did you call it?
I think I called it compound grief, and I don't know if that's the exact textbook definition of compound grief, but
I don't know what a textbook definition, but it's the exact way that somebody could think of it. It's if you're grieving, not going to your families for Thanksgiving, and then on top of it, a friend comes up from the past, and then on top of it, you're sad because you just can't be around friends like you normally do. I mean, it's just this, and that really what's happened with COVID. It's like
exactly.
one sad, unfortunate event after the other that, if you're not processing it, can just build and build and build.
Yeah, so we were talking about some things that have been helpful to us and ways of addressing grief. And one thing for me, I found that the first time I experienced profound loss was when the co-founder of this organization, Anne-Marie Ames, passed away suddenly back in 2017.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, my method of trying to cope and understand the grief I was going through was to reach out to close friends who had also gone through loss to say, I don't know what I'm experiencing. Help me through this fog. And they did, but only to an extent, because it's a path we have to go on our own too. So I know you had a book excerpt you might want to read now. Would it make sense, or later?
Yeah, well, I'm going to close with that one, but I do want to read about this because that does come up with the other, that is my next point that I wanted to make about grief. There was an article that I read a while ago, and it says in the article, a natural way to want to soothe. It's our natural way. We want to soothe and we want to take other people's pain away for two reasons. Because it is our natural way. As our species, I think we do want to soothe people. But then the other part of that is grief and death, and even a mental illness can sometimes make people very uncomfortable. So to sit next to somebody who's experienced a tremendous amount of grief, what it does is it begins to open up the portal windows to where you're like, oh my God, but I still have my mom. And what if I lose my mom? And I'm sitting next to her, and just my life could end up like that. Or, so then it's just like, you just want to shut it off. And when you're sitting with somebody that's grieving, one of the only things that you can do, and I'm not a professional at this, I'm getting better and better. Grief opened this door for me, is to not interrupt them and allow them to speak of the person, and try your hardest not to be like, oh, I felt that exact same way when my dog died. Like, no. We can talk about your dog, but right. I mean, it's a very like personal, like let me let this out. And there is no one grief that is the same. So one thing that I learned from this, that it taught me, is to never say, I tried to never say these two words that just drove me absolutely crazy, is I know. I could never say to you, Jen, oh my God, just because I've been in a hospital, Jen, does not mean that I know what you experienced when you had to go into the hospital on Christmas Day. I don't know that,
Mhm.
you know? So it's often the hardest is to keep your mouth closed while another person is allowing themselves to be vulnerable enough to share the pain that they're in because of the loss. And this is an excerpt I love because it explains it very well. This is from this book called The Five Invitations. This is quite possibly, aside from Option B by Sheryl Sandberg, and this one were the two books that changed the way I view grief and how I was able to heal from it. And this one paragraph was just mind altering for me. And it says, helping, fixing, and serving represent three different ways of seeing life. When you help, you see life as weak. When you fix, you see life as broken. But when you serve, you see life as whole. Fixing and helping could be the work of the ego, but service is the work of the soul. Fixing and helping are draining, and over time we burn out, but service is renewing. When we serve, our work itself will renew us. So try it sometime. Just sit with another person without a solution to their problem. Without playing a role, don't analyze, don't fix, don't meddle, and don't mend. Just listen generously. Often a receptive silence heals more than all the well-meaning words.
That is so powerful. It is so true. And when I've had experiences when I've been struggling deeply with even during COVID, and I've reached out to close friends, coworkers,
Mhm.
the most meaningful time spent has been them just letting me vent and letting me release the grief in any way that I am able to, and not trying to say, well, have you tried this, or have you, and it's so hard because I even do it myself. But being a compassionate listener is something that can change everything for
It can
a
change
relationship.
the whole thing, and it's a huge lesson. And for anybody that has grieved a tremendous, profound grief, I would say that one thing that we would all have in common is you have began the journey of becoming a better listener. Because a lot of times we just talk to, and I'll speak for myself. A lot of times I talk and I kind of want to hear my own voice, my own story. You know what I mean? Like, so to sit there and ask somebody, and so then one thing that I usually do with grieving, depending on what it is I say, do you want to just vent right now, or do you want any feedback whatsoever? Because if you just want to vent, then I'll go ahead, which will just cue me to be like, hush, Casey. Like,
Well, and another thing is I've heard people say in compassionate listening, saying, tell me more. Like, if you don't know what to say, you don't want to intervene with try this kind of perspective.
right.
Tell me more. I want to know more.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And if it is somebody that a loved one passed away, one of the things that I think what really works when it comes to death is this. Do you want me to discuss it with you? Do you want me to text you to memories, like if something comes up? Because what I've learned a little bit is that there are kind of two kinds of people like myself. If people call me and tell me about my brother, or somebody like recently put on Facebook, their memory popped up and it was a picture that my brother took and she like tagged me and my sister in it. Those things, they don't upset me because it keeps his memory alive. Macklemore has a song that it says, the first time you pass away is when you're taken from this earth. I think it's kind of this, but the second time you pass away is when everyone stops saying your name.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've sort of began to ask people that I know that have a loved one has passed away, how do you want to go about this? Like, because I can text you on their birthday and I can try to remember certain special times, but if that's not what you want, you let me know. And it can change. In the beginning, a person can say, don't ever mention their name again. It breaks my heart every time I hear it. Or,
and more often, I think you hear they lean towards the latter. They do want you to say their name. They do want you to remember, but that you bring up a really good point. Like, honor their grief and how they want to move through the process. And actually, maybe we could go to one of the other resources you were talking about with the stages of grief. And I could even show it on my screen, I think.
Because I'll be I won't say them all correctly, but then I'm going to bring up two that are sort of on there, but sort of aren't on there.
You know what? Unfortunately, I can't screen share, but that's okay. We're going to mention the name of the resource, and then we're going to share it in the comments.
Okay.
So that'll be fine. Let's do that.
Okay.
Actually, Katie just gave me sharing capabilities. Let me see if I can do this here. All right, Katie, behind the scenes.
Katie's behind the scenes. She's amazing.
See what we can do here. Where is it? Here it is. Okay.
Okay. So, and I mean, you tell me with your experience, like denial, anger, depression, bargaining, and acceptance. How did you go through all of those? Maybe you didn't know the exact terms, like not knowing. I know you know them, but you know what I mean.
I did, and it was interesting. We were saying before we got on the call that you could be in one, stage, and you realize I'm in anger, but I'm also feeling anxiety, and it's the underlying, feeling.
Mm-hmm. I didn't realize this until I looked at this the other day, because I look under denial, it says confusion. Okay. So the most I experienced.
And I'm going to stop screen sharing for the second, and we'll have that resource in the comments too. So
check that resource out, because it really does help you a bit. The one thing I didn't know, I was experiencing a ton of anxiety, but it was really anger and rage. Like I was experiencing the anxiety I would say would be the symptom, but then the emotion that was underneath it, because sometimes anxiety is fear, but it was really, I was very angry for a very long period of times. And still sometimes I have little bouts with it occasionally here and there. But then two things that I wanted people to know that I feel, even though they say it in there, and I did not read any books by Kubler-Ross, but they are the people that have really coined the whole grief work world, is anxiety and forgetfulness.
Mm-hmm.
I was highly anxious, and I forgot. My kids, Hayes was 5 years old at the time. Hayes was in kindergarten, and he used to sing this song in the car. Mom forgets everything. Mom forgets everything.
Leave it to the kids to point out our fallback,
But I mean, at least it made it into something funny. But I mean, I would forget everything, and my kids started getting a little anxiety thinking I would forget them. But I never did. But those are big. Did you experience that at all with Anne-Marie?
Yes, I mean, for sure. I felt like the months after I was in a fog, and yes, forgetfulness was definitely one of those things. And you were saying, you showed the cover of that one book by Claire Bidwell Smith, I believe.
Oh, yes. So this is another book. Yeah. I have all these books. This is another book, Anxiety, the Missing Stage of Grief. It's phenomenal. And it's also, she gives you like work to do in it, which I love a good, like, asking me to do something aside from just reading it. Mm-hmm. And that it goes into anxiety. They also touch a lot on forgetfulness in that book.
Yeah.
You follow her on Instagram?
I follow her on Instagram, and she does workshops, and just a really good resource. So check that out for sure.
One other thing I wanted to read really quickly was from this book that it's all about your chakras. It's the 7 energy points. We've kind of discussed this. So this is something that is a different way to look at how your grief could abide kind of in your body, or how you're responding to it. Because for so long, I thought it was because my mom, my dad, and my brother were not here in the physical flesh. They weren't here. So I focused a lot on the actual one-to-one contact. This is called, it's a great book, it's huge, but it's really good. Eastern Body, Western Mind. It's very good if anybody likes the yogic chakra system. She says, grief is nearly always based on loss, especially things about how we feel powerless to do anything. But it's extremely important to reclaim that part of us that was attached to what we lost. For example, the grown woman who lost her father when she was little may have simultaneously lost her inner child, or the nurturing husband who lost his wife may have lost the part of himself that was tender and open. We can tolerate the loss of a love object or person, but not the loss of the vital piece of ourselves. So it's important to remember that the point of grief work is to regain connection with the self inside rather than increase our attachment to what was lost. So you have to remember, you can ask yourself a few questions. Why was this person so special? What did he or she bring to me that I am missing in myself? And what part of me was particularly bonded to that person? So we grieve because a sacred essence within ourselves has been awakened, but then has also been compromised. So to take this to where
that's deep work. That's really getting deep.
It's very deep. And I was at a conference, a yoga work retreat after my mom had passed away. My brother hadn't passed away yet. And I raised my hand and I was telling this woman how inconsolable this grief was. And I didn't really even think I would experience this much because my mom and I were very, very close. And most probably people probably think from my post that we were like best friends, talked every day, but we had a lot of trauma in between our relationship and things like that. But the connection between a mother and a child is so profound that when your mother does pass away, you experience what I call like you float in outer space for a while. You're like, oh my God, I feel like I have nothing. I say the umbilical cord is cut when they pass away, to be honest. But the way to say this is what was compromised and what this woman told me, and compromised and awakened at the same time, was that when my mom passed away, my dad had already passed away, I became the elder. I became the person who I didn't have anywhere to go. I was the one, so I had no one to call, no one to talk to. So then that took me from like their physical presence to being like, oh my God. So then you would automatically assume that probably my inner child was like, absolutely not. I'm not really ready to be that person yet, but you're forced into this role. Mm-hmm. So it is deep work, but once you can kind of shift it, I think it definitely makes the grief feel different. It feels less, for me, it felt less, I was less of a victim at that point. Like I was, because there was a part of me that could still be like, well, I'm the one with no family, so everybody else should just treat me differently. But then I had to focus and figure out what to do to kind of become my own mother and in a sense, and my own father.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible how when you read into some of these insights, you can make progress in your grief. And I know for you too, yoga has been deeply impactful in your journey through grief. And every Friday, the next couple of Fridays, we have yoga with you on Instagram. So we're going to be doing some poses, so check those out. You can go back to our Instagram IGTV on This Is My Brave and review, and because there are some, can you go through, just kind of describe very briefly the heart opening?
Yes. So in that book, Eastern Body, Western Mind, it is more of a yogic stance on it, and it goes through all the chakras and all the body, the points of these energy areas. And grief is usually from here, like your chest to your throat. So it's all here. Mm-hmm. So it's your heart, it's your voice, it's your chest, it's your solar plexus. So one of the things, I have a little problem that I used when I was majorly grieving, and I've shared this before, you can use a pillow, but these are the bolsters that you have like in the studio. And I'm doing it sitting up, but like I said, we're going to do one of the Fridays will be about grief poses. But what you want to focus on is opening and lifting the heart up higher than just laying flat on your back. So, and you're constantly like moving the heart forward, because what's going to happen is the heart's going to lock up. The heart's going to like shut down a little bit. And I think bringing it back to COVID, I think a lot of people during this time were grieving so much and so profoundly. It's such a rapid pace that we're not even paying attention to the fact that we are shutting down a little bit. We are shutting off a bit because we're being told to shut it off. We can't have.
Well, and because we're physically isolated. Yeah, exactly. And it just makes sense. It's natural.
Yeah. So any sort of a lift to the chest, and then there's camel, which we can go over. That one's when you pull back, you really open up. And then any type of a twist when you're twisting from this part of the body and just like pulling and allowing that part to experience some movement. And then I will teach that same day, I'll teach about how we can send your breath to your heart and back up. And once you do that, you begin.
It's amazing how powerful the breath and the opening of those different chakras can make a difference. And yeah, so we'll have that on our IGTV, so check that out.
Yes.
And I'm trying to think, what else were we going to cover?
So one other thing I wanted to talk about, I can show the books one more time, but the best resource that I have found, aside from a therapist, which I think you'll mention that there is you have a.
Yes, This Is My Brave has a partnership with BetterHelp, and we have a code for 1 month of therapy that you can access. So go to betterhelp.com/thisismybrave. We don't get anything out of it. It's just a resource we like to share because right now we could all use some support. And so if you haven't tried therapy, it's a great time to give it a shot with teletherapy. And I use BetterHelp. I've been a user for almost a year now, and I love it. So definitely wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, so that was one of the resources. The next resource is optionb.org, I believe. If check both.
We'll share it in the comments.
Share it in the comments. Okay. Option B was the Sheryl Sandberg, the woman who also wrote, I forget what her other book was, but she's the Facebook CFO or something like that. So apologize, Sharon, if she ever sees this. But the Option B website is absolutely phenomenal. It gives you so many resources and exercises and ability to check in with people. It's phenomenal. I was on there yesterday for probably about 15 minutes.
So the backstory is she tragically lost her husband. I believe it was a heart attack. And it was the Option B is the memoir about how she kind of moved through her grief, and Option B was what kind of came out of that, and such a powerful community, like Casey said, resources, exercises. Definitely check it out.
And they also have Instagram as well, and they tell individual stories, which is one of the also most, like, aside from our This Is My Brave and what we do there, when you are in a deep state of grief, hearing another person's story just makes you. It makes it like you're not alone. Again, same thing that This Is My Brave does. It makes you know that you're not alone. And there is also in her book, she talks about post-traumatic growth, which was a huge game changer for me. So we have PTSD, and then these two doctors coined this term called post-traumatic growth, and it's how to bring resilience back into your life from a very traumatizing experience. And there's all sorts of resources. If you Google post-traumatic growth, you will find a tremendous amount of stories and the steps and all the things that bring you to that part in your journey, to seeing it differently.
Yeah, I mean, because I think that's what people don't even realize. That I think you mentioned it at the beginning of the episode, like you come out, or maybe it's going to be in this thing you're going to share at the end, but you come out on the other side a different person. You're changed in some way, and so trying to look at it from that angle can be helpful.
Yeah, I'm not the same person I was, and I'm not the same, and I changed after every single death. And then everybody, once we have gone through this time,
this universal thing, I mean, everyone is going to experience the loss of a loved one, or, you know, the loss of something in their life, like you were saying, divorce, or the loss of a job, you know, so many things that, you know, it's a universal feeling that we don't talk enough about. Just like you were saying, the correlation, we don't talk enough about mental illness, and that's what we're doing. But
you don't. And it's you're experiencing really on the same thing. We're experiencing the loss of time. We're experiencing the loss of time with one another, and we're experiencing the loss of, like, you know, there's probably a ton of us, I know there is experiencing a ton amount of guilt and being like, well, oh, I never took advantage of that before, and now I'll never take for granted this. And let me tell you this much: after everybody has passed away, that I have a sister, my sister, whom I love, and she's still with me, and my nephew and my niece. I still have that, you know, survivor's guilt, thinking, oh, I could do more, I should be with them more. But we'll take things for granted again. But the profound thing is, there is a massive shift in your being and the way that you look at life. You don't look at it differently. I mean, you don't look at it the same. You look at it completely differently. And I agree. It has been the most profound experience I've ever gone through. So with that, I do want to read this last excerpt. Is that good? Yeah. I think we covered everything. I'm going to check my notes again. I think we covered everything. We talked about the books. We talked about option B. And, so this one thing before I read this, because this is big. There are gifts to grief. Okay. So grief can feel absolutely horrendous and horrific at times. And it's usually like 10,000 elephants are sitting on your chest is usually the feeling that it feels like. Once you process your grief and you go through the grief, and you don't just shut yourself off from it, and you don't close your heart or your mind or your spirit, you will, and this is a for sure, you will be able to be more compassionate and more empathetic. You will be able to tap into and experience another person's pain on a profound level that you never were able to experience before. I thought, prior to experiencing death and grief, just because I had been in 3 mental hospitals, that I really knew what pain was. And honestly, it didn't scratch the surface. So remember, there is a gift, just like with mental illness, there is a gift. There's always going to be a gift. So you can't lose sight of the fact that there is a gift involved with this pain.
Yeah, it's like one of our favorite author, writers, activists, Glennon Doyle, says, you know, pain is, I think she calls it a traveling professor. It's not, it shouldn't be like a hot potato that you want to pass as fast as you can. It should be something that you invite in, because we can't grow unless we go through painful times in our lives. So I totally appreciate that. It does have gifts, as painful as they are. But.
Yeah, it's a painful gift, but it comes with purpose. And so I always think, what is this pain teaching? What is this? How is this pain teaching me? And then how will I go out and serve? Is like my question when I'm in a lot of emotional pain. Now, this is another great book. It's not solely about grief, but it's 7,000 Ways to Listen. And when I got it, I was like, I thought there was only one. So with your ears, but no. So it's profound. And I read this page, and anybody listening to this right now that has experienced grief, this passage will hit you right in the spot where you're feeling your grief. It's going to hit you right in your heart, because he found all the words that he found the words. So this is what he says. I know there is no place to go with your grief other than to feel it and to ride it like a raft until that rough sea brings you to a strange, familiar shore that is both where you have been and entirely new. I know nothing I can say will ease the pain beneath your breathing right now. We can only gain strength from sharing our experience without second guessing any of it. Just putting what we've been through into the small fire between us that has kept us warm for years. I want to walk that pathless path together through grief and death and faith and the mystery that lives beneath fairness and unfairness. It is beyond understanding and beyond all map making. We can only climb our way like those before us into a clearing that begs for our acceptance if we are to know any peace at all. This mysterious path doesn't remove the grief or the pain, but somehow, like a knife dropped into the sea, our grief and pain lose their edge. Just know that you are both alone and not alone. And though I can't go with you to the cliff of all you feel inside, I am right here with you.
So powerful.
I just love it.
I want to get that book. It speaks to
So
that path that you can be on with someone who's, with you through your grief, but that it's a path you have to forge on your own too. So
it's
so
a
powerful.
it's a lonely path, but it's a profound path if you allow yourself to really feel into it, and it can be a complete life-changing experience.
Well, Casey, this has been eye-opening, and I always learn something when we get together and do these Zooms and Instagram. So thank you so much for sharing your experience and what has helped you. And we're all, struggling with some form of grief through COVID and the holidays. And we hope that this has been helpful to our viewers. So thank you for doing this with me.
Thank you. You always bring everything back up to the surface, and I get to experience it in a different way. So I'm so grateful for you and for this platform and for your idea to put this out there, because the next couple months are going to be you know what Glennon also says in one of my favorite words, they're going to be beautiful. It's a combination of brutal and beautiful. So it's going to be great and it's going to be sad at the same time. So let's just ride the wave.
Exactly. We are going to ride the wave. We're going to brave the storm.
Yes.
And we're going to brave it together. So thank you so much, Casey.
Thank you. And thanks to Katie too from behind the scenes. She's amazing.
Yes, shout out to Katie. And thank you all for tuning in for this last season of season 1 of Brave TV. We are going to be taking a little break as we get geared up for season 2, but join us back in February for season 2 of Brave TV. Thanks so much, guys.